Found footage is relatively new, and new things are bad, right? Well, sometimes, but as you'd expect, there's more to it than that. At the heart of found footage is really the idea of diegesis. In most films, the cinematography is not a part of the narrative. Like here, in The Witch, there isn't a guy holding an Arri Alexa filming this family of 15th century Puritans because that wouldn't make any sense. The camera in The Witch is non-diegetic, it's not a part of the story. Like the soundtrack. The essential difference in found footage films is that the camera exists within the story. One of the characters is holding it and filming the events of the movie for some, often contrived, reason. This is a relatively recent innovation in film, but the idea of diegetic storytelling devices is far from it. Even classic Gothic novels like Frankenstein and Dracula used diegetic devices, but instead of found footage, we call them epistolary novels. Really, the only difference between a novel that takes the form of a series of letters written by the characters and, say, the Blair Witch Project, is technology. At the time of writing, the best Bram Stoker had to work with was the printing press, so his characters used that to convey the story. As the years went on, radio broadcasts, like Orson Welles' now legendary adaptation of The War of the Worlds, supposedly spread mass panic because it was presented as a series of news bulletins, and people allegedly thought it was real, although much of the supposed hysteria was blown out of proportion. Found footage finally came to horror cinema in 1980 with Cannibal Holocaust, which has portions of traditional filmmaking blended with documentary footage recovered from a dead film crew in the Amazon rainforest. But Cannibal Holocaust, with its sexual violence and real animal killings, was far too extreme to ever bring the idea of found footage to mainstream audiences. With some exceptions like the pretty good BBC programme Ghostwatch and the god-awful The Last Broadcast, found footage horror was practically non-existent until the much-hyped release of the Blair Witch Project in 1999, which is still the most profitable of any found footage film, and is perhaps the best ever case for the old adage that what you don't see is often more frightening than what you do. Like the shark in Jaws, the antagonist of the Blair Witch Project is all the scarier because we don't see it. Armed with just the forests of Maryland, 2 pretty bad cameras and some sticks and stones, Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez made one of the most terrifying films of all time, with a simple conceit that people are most afraid of the unknown, and in doing so set the template for what the found footage movie would look like. Film students Heather, Mike and Josh head out to the small town of Burkittsville, Maryland to make a documentary about the legendary Blair Witch who apparently lives in the woods. After some casual banter and hiking, things begin to go sideways. Strange noises are heard from the group's tent, weird piles of rocks and stick figures are left by unseen forces, and the woods themselves seem to be distorting reality. After walking south all day from a log that crosses a creek, the group somehow end up in the exact same spot, as if the woods don't want them to leave and are closing in around them. It really is remarkable how powerful the Blair Witch Project is with such meagre resources, and much of its effectiveness can be attributed to the production. The film used a technique called retroscripting, in which basic outlines for the characters' behaviour and goals would be left in film canisters for the actors to read each day and improvise around. They were really camping out in the woods for days, and the directors would really leave weird stuff for the actors to find and freak them out by playing creepy sounds from a boombox while they were trying to sleep, and the result is a descent into hysteria that rattles me every time I watch it. There are some who complain about the actors and constant motion of the camera, but I think that it's these very things that give the Blair Witch Project such a strong sense of verisimilitude, to the point where it feels like you're actually getting lost in the woods with these people. In fact, I'd argue that the ceaseless motion of the camera heightens our awareness of what Adam Charles Hart in his essay Millennial Fears calls off-screen space. Because it's dark and the video footage is of such low quality, we get the sense that the constantly roaming camera could suddenly land on something horrifying, Rather than the more mannered style of conventional cinematography, there's an unpredictability to found footage that makes the off-screen space more explicit and therefore more impactful. Charles Hart wrote, "The scenographic space outside the frame is best understood less as one inhabited by material objects than it is a space of threats, a paranoid space constantly sending signals of anxiety to the audience and, seemingly, the characters as well." Blair Witch blurs the line between what is and isn't real, bringing us into the film by making us consider the space we can't see just as the characters are. And it's this use of space and of low quality video that makes the film feel so real and forces us to empathize with these characters. The Blair Witch Project was a sensation, especially considering its innovative use of viral marketing. The filmmakers created a website full of fake police reports, photographic evidence, and made a short documentary fleshing out the mythology of the titular witch. Hell, the actors were even listed as deceased on IMDb and didn't appear at any promotional events to heighten the sense that what we were seeing was real. Blair Witch brought found footage to the world and made about 4,000 times its production budget for it, but found footage itself wouldn't become the defining component of 21st century horror until 2007, with the release of Paranormal Activity, a film which, like Blair Witch before it, used improvisation and viral marketing to great commercial success, but is... it's a bit rubbish, isn't it? Why is it that no other found footage film has ever captured that Blair Witch energy again? The glut of found footage movies released in the wake of Paranormal Activity's success aren't uniformly bad. In fact, some of them are excellent, but they work in different ways than Blair Witch did, and where the Blair Witch Project succeeded, Paranormal Activity falls flat on its face. The main problem being, it isn't scary. For several reasons. It takes place in a big modern house in San Diego, which is about the least atmospheric location I can imagine. Its characters are so vapid and obnoxiously unlikable that it's very hard to care what happens to them. The camera, which moved so freely and effectively not only in the Blair Witch Project but traditionally shot horror films too, is locked off on a tripod here. In my Suspiria video I droned on for ages about this shot and why it's so creepy, because moving cameras are scary. There could be something lurking in the corner there, and even if there isn't, you can wring a hell of a lot of tension from the possibility that there's something out there. Paranormal Activity is really just a series of painfully long daytime sequences in which our nothing characters babble on incessantly about nothing interesting, and this same damn shot of the couple's bedroom where occasionally the door will move or Katie will stand next to the bed for a while. But artistic failure that it is, Paranormal Activity did open the floodgates, and a deluge of found footage came rushing through. Of course, these films are cheap to produce, so a lot of opportunistic filmmakers who aren't very talented used it as a crutch, hence the sea of boring trash that gives found footage a bad name, full of lazy writing, no ideas, and dull plots. But the best of these movies use found footage not just for its low cost, but for deliberate effect. The use of a subjective camera in the first two Wreck films is largely responsible for the sense of panic and claustrophobia that infects them, as a reporter is trapped inside a Barcelona apartment building that is quickly filling up with ferocious zombies, and even the uninfected people inside begin to lose their sense of humanity. Here, the use of found footage lends the proceedings a sense of immediacy and keeps us just as in the dark, sometimes literally, as the characters who quickly shed social norms, training, and procedure when confronted with unbridled animalistic violence, and things quickly descend into a mad frenzy for survival. We see this sense of subjectivity luring us into the story again and again in found footage movies. Towards the end of the Borderlands, two men become lost in a series of underground caves which seem to close in around them, and by extension, us, until we're literally swallowed up by the earth, a sequence which would be far less effective if it were traditionally shot. In Troll Hunter, the faux documentary style lends a dry humour to the outlandish and fantastical monsters that appear in it, as they are treated like giant pests rather than mythological creatures, which just wouldn't really work in a regular film. And Ty West's excellent The Sacrament uses a similar approach to wildly different effect, as the pretend Vice documentary gone horribly wrong brings to life the all too real tragedy of the Jonestown Massacre. Found footage removes the clear barrier between fact and fiction in a way that can be deeply uncomfortable to watch, as it confronts us with the inherent voyeurism of the cinema, particularly horror. The point of view shot has long been a staple of the slasher genre, as we see the masked killer's victims from their perspective, encouraging us to look at them as such, and this sense is heightened to disturbing effect in found footage films, especially the ones about murderers. Following in the footsteps of Peeping Tom, in which a serial killer films his victims as they're dying while forcing them to look at their own terrified reflections in a mirror, movies like the Poughkeepsie Tapes and Be My Cat, A Film for Anne, confront us directly with the reality that horror films mimic for entertainment. The grainy tapes of the nameless sadistic killer in the Poughkeepsie Tapes feel like something you'd watch on the news and look so real I honestly felt kinda sick watching it. These films are framed literally from the perspective of their villains, which, for me at least, makes them really hard to enjoy as they linger relentlessly on the suffering of innocent people. Be My Cat so completely blurs the line between fiction and reality that the line seems to disappear entirely. The film is basically a director's audition tape courting Anne Hathaway for some kind of snuff film. The director of the film plays the director of a film who is playing a man who abducts and kills women, and he actually kills the actresses he's hired and eventually becomes confused himself about the line between the director and the character he's supposedly playing. These films veer so close to reality that it can feel more as though you're the one being attacked rather than enjoying the fun blood splatters like the sick creep you are. Seriously, these films almost made me question why I spend so much time enjoying horror movies. Well, almost. Really, like anything, found footage can be used for good or for evil, and even in films that aren't horror. District 9, Chronicle, End of Watch, and Earth to Echo all incorporate found footage to heighten their sense of realism and seriousness to varying degrees of success, but horror is really where found footage lives. In recent years, the constant improvement of technology is making the distinction between consumer-grade and professional cameras less and less clear, as movies like the otherwise unremarkable Blair Witch reboot make use of high-definition headcams and drones, to the point where I almost forgot it was found footage at all. In a more gimmicky but surprisingly effective vein is the desktop film, most notably the Unfriended series, which take place entirely on a computer screen and are actually quite entertaining, if rather silly. Found footage may have a bad name, but when utilized well, it can be surprisingly flexible as a format, heightening realism, removing our complacent sense of safety, and adding weight to the horrible things we may otherwise unreflectively enjoy. And although some would say it's played out, I think we're just waiting for someone to have another great idea about how to scare us.
Yeah.